identical to a similar flock composed of different birds. Or even if we think of the universe as nothing at all over and above the quarks themselves. A second reason for thinking that the universe does not exist by a necessity of its own nature is that we have strong astrophysical evidence that the universe began to exist. An essential property of a necessary being is eternality. That is to say, being without beginning or end. Anything which comes into existence at a certain time can fail to exist, and therefore is not necessary in its being. In one of the most startling developments of modern science, we now have pretty strong evidence that the universe is not eternal in the past, but had an absolute beginning about 13 billion years ago in a cataclysmic event known as the Big Bang. What makes the Big Bang so startling is that it represents the origin of the universe from literally nothing. For all matter and energy, even physical space and time themselves, come into being at the Big Bang. As the physicist P.C.W. Davies explains, the coming into being of the universe, as discussed in modern science, is not just a matter of imposing some sort of organization upon a previous incoherent state, but literally the coming into being of all physical things from nothing. Of course, alternative theories have been proposed over the years to try to avoid this absolute beginning, but none of these theories has commended itself to the scientific community as more plausible than the Big Bang theory. In fact, in 2003, Arvind Borde, Alan Guth, and Alexander Vilenkin were able to prove that any universe which is, on average, in a state of cosmic expansion cannot be eternal in the past, but must have had an absolute beginning. Vilenkin pulls no punches. I quote, "It is said that an argument is what convinces reasonable men, and a proof is what it takes to convince even an unreasonable man. With the proof now in place, cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning." End quote. The beginning of the universe not only reveals the contingency of the universe, it also shows the universe to be contingent in a very special way. It came into existence from nothing. This is significant, for it not only undermines the claim of the radical atheist who maintains that the universe exists by a necessity of its own nature, but it also thrusts the more traditional atheist who would answer Leibniz by holding that the universe is the exception to the principle of sufficient reason, that it exists inexplicably, into a very awkward position of maintaining not merely that the universe exists eternally without an explanation, but rather that for no reason at all, it magically popped into being out of nothing, a position which might make theism look like a welcome alternative. So atheists have not been so bold as to deny premise 2 and say that the universe exists necessarily. Premise 2 also seems to be plausibly true. But then, given that the universe exists, the remainder of the argument follows. There's one last way that the atheist might try to escape Leibniz's argument. He might say that while there are no beings that exist necessarily, nevertheless, it is necessary that something or other exist. He will agree with the theist that it is impossible that nothing exists. But he thinks that the proper conclusion to be drawn from this fact is not that a necessary being exists, but that necessarily some contingent being or other exists. This is akin to saying that while necessarily every object has a shape, nonetheless, there is no particular shape which everything necessarily has. In the same way, it's necessary that something or other exist, but there isn't anything that exists necessarily. In short, premise one is, on this view, false after all. The universe exists contingently and inexplicably. Some universe must exist, yes, but there is no explanation why the universe exists. Alexander Pruss has pointed out that this view has an extremely implausible consequence. It's plausible that no conjunction of claims about the non-existence of various beings entails, say, that a unicorn exists. After all, how could the fact that certain things do not exist entail that some other contingent thing does exist? But on the present atheist view, the conjunction, there are no mountains, there are no people, there are no planets, there are no rocks, etc., including everything that is not a unicorn, entails that there is a unicorn. For if it is necessary that contingent beings exist, and none of the other contingent beings exist, then the only thing left is a unicorn. Hence, a conjunction about the non-existence of certain things entails that a unicorn exists, which seems absurd. Moreover, on this view, there is nothing which would account for why there exist contingent beings in every possible world. Since there is no necessary being, there's nothing that could cause contingent beings to exist in every possible world, and no explanation why every world includes contingent beings. There is no strict logical inconsistency in the concept of a world which is devoid of contingent beings. What accounts for the fact that in every possible world contingent beings exist? Given the infinity of broadly logically possible worlds, the odds that in all of them contingent beings just happen inexplicably to exist is infinitesimal. Hence, the probability of the atheist's hypothesis is effectively zero. Hence, this last gambit fails as well. In conclusion, then, given the truth of the three premises, the conclusion is logically inescapable. God is the explanation of the universe's existence. Moreover, the argument implies that God is an uncaused, unembodied mind which transcends the physical universe and even space and time themselves, and who exists necessarily. And he is the explanation for why anything at all exists. Well, that completes the thoughts that I wanted to share with you this evening, so now we'll open it to any questions that you might have. And I'm going to avail myself of this chair for this part of it, the evening. Okay, go ahead.
Hey, Dr. Craig. Really enjoyed it. I appreciate you coming.
Thanks.
Would it be all right if I ask two questions, one of which is a clarification question?
Yes, of course.
Okay, the first premise, everything that exists has an explanation. Is the explanation coterminous with cause? And if
No.
it is, it's not. Okay, how not?
Well, because, as I said, for things that exist by a necessity of their own nature, they're uncaused. So take numbers, for example. Many mathematicians think that numbers exist necessarily, but they're not caused by anything. They just exist by a necessity of their own nature. They're logically necessary beings, and so it's impossible that they not exist.
Okay. The second question would be, how would you respond to a Humean style skepticism of David Hume, which says we can't have any ideas which first don't come through our impressions, because if we can't have an idea that doesn't come through the impression, how do we talk of necessary being